Hi there, welcome to my channel. So in today's video, I'll be showing you one small project in which we'll be creating a simple web application comprising of the web app, a front end and a back end. And we will discuss about the whole architecture of the application, plus how we can utilize the APIs, how we can have the database interactivity also. So what are the key services that I'm going to use it over here? I'm going to use AWS Amplify. Along with that, I can show you with the S3 bucket if you are hosting some static website, static pages, how we can utilize in order to put the data into the database, our DynamoDB, and how to create a serverless function over here, Lambda, then how we can give the permissions for the Lambda to execute the operations. And we can have over here the API gateway, how we can consume those APIs in our front end. So all those things I'm going to cover up in this small project. So let's start with the console. So we will jump into the console. But before proceeding to the console, so I'll just show you like what are the like what is the whole architecture that comprises of. So you can see user will hit the AWS Amplify application where it will be hosted, and it will call the API, and in turn it will call the Lambda. Lambda will be given the permission in order to perform the put, like the write operations or the read operations on the DynamoDB. So this is the architecture of the sample of application. So in our scenario, we'll be having like instead of if you're having a static website hosted with a S3 bucket, so we can use S3 bucket also instead of using AWS Amplify. So I will show you both the scenarios, how we can manage to utilize Amplify as well as S3 bucket, but rest of the concepts, rest of the architecture will remain the same. So these are the 5 steps that we are going to perform. So we will create a web app, then we will create a serverless function using Lambda. Then we will link the serverless function to a web app and how to create a table in the DynamoDB and how to perform the interactivity between our web app, API, and the database. So we will start with the first step. So the very first step, it is to create a static website using this static resources. So we will be hosting our website using this AWS Amplify. So we will create a web app with the Amplify console. So let's move on to the console and we will test our application also. So this is the Amplify. You can search it over here, Amplify. So once you hit on it, it will open the console for this. So we will click on this create new app. So before creating a new app, make it show okay, before creating an app over here, creating a new app, we will do one thing. We will just go to the, you can use any editor or whatever you want. So we will create one in index.html file, just a normal HTML having a body to it and the title. That's it. So this HTML file, you need to compress it and keep it in a zip file. So this is how it should be. So right click, compress to zip file. Okay, this is what we are going to upload in the Amplify. So let's go to the console. Here, I will choose over here. I'm not using any GitHub or Bitbucket or code commit. You can utilize it if you want to manage the versioning and all those things. You can use the code commit and all. I have created a separate video with the code commit. You can just have a look into it. Then deploy without Git. So click next. So here you can see this is the app name. So my first app. So you can put some branch name. I'm just keeping it as staging, and you can see choose the zip folder or just you can drag and drop. So, this is the file and it should not contain anything else, and save and deploy. So keep it indexed by default, because if you keep some other pages, you need to provide the slash after the DNS. You have to provide the slash to file name. So by default, it is picking up. If you go to the app settings, if you see the general settings, you will find that it is having index, I think, in the hosting. So if you go to the rewrite and redirects, you can see over here, it is by default index.html. So you can modify those settings and all, but for this demo purpose, you can just have a index file. So let me click on this. So here we go. So our first step, that is our hosting a web app, it is being done. Creating a web app, it is being done. So we tested also. So we will now move on to the next step. So as discussed earlier, in the second step, we will be creating a Lambda function from scratch. So we'll be using a Python 3.8, and we will see how we can create and configure a Lambda function. We will also test that Lambda function. So this is a separate step number 2, irrespective of the AWS Amplify. So let's proceed to the console and open the Lambda. So we will create a Lambda function. So you can see from the console, you can just go to this, make it sure. So you can see in the AWS Amplify, we use this region over here, North Virginia, US East 1. So make it sure you use the same one. Better to keep it same for all the services that we are going to spin up. So here we will create a function. I already have a function over here. Let's say we'll create a new function over here. So I'll use from scratch, and then my first function. Okay, so we will choose over here Python 3.8. You can use the later also, but don't use it below 3.8. So nothing to change, no permissions and all. By default, it will create execution role. It will give the basic permissions to execute that Lambda function. So let's create a function over here. Okay, so my first function has been created. Now in this one, we are going to scroll it down and go to the code. So you can see over here, this is my Lambda function. Now we are going to add something over here, like in order to return something, some more valuable value. So I've just written over here, I will just provide you the sample to you also. So you can just copy paste rather than typing it. So here, just a Lambda function, it is having a name. It is having event first name plus event last name. So it is returning the name, the concatenation of both. So it will be taking this first name and last name. So I'll just copy the whole thing and paste it over here in my Lambda function. Okay, so that's it. Now we can, so you can see changes has not been deployed, file save, and then deploy. So once you deploy, we can have a test configuration one time being added. So I will just go over here, configure the test event. You can just create an event name, my first event. And let's say, so we need to, so here, I need to provide the key value pairs. So let's say first name and value, let's say just file. And we have over here last name. So I'll be just mentioning over here. And then I'll just remove the last one. Okay, I'll just remove the comma over here. And that's it. At the same time, I can just, in order to test my Lambda function, I can just execute this function. So I can go back, test. So it's executing. So you can see over here. So some issue is there. So there is line number 3, unhandled. Most likely issue is from the function code. Okay. Oh, okay. So let me show you something. I make some mistake over here. Okay, so there was the issue with the parameters, the key value pair that I was passing, in that the n was capital and I was passing the small. That's why the error was coming. So just make it sure whatever you're writing over here, or whatever you're writing in the code, it should be similar to this one. So now you can see if I test this one, so I am getting over here hello from just small thing. So this is my Python code. So just I added few comments also. I'll provide you this file so you can have your Lambda function. So our Lambda function is being tested now. Now we will move on to the next step. So our next step is how we can link this function to a web app. That can only be done with the help of an API gateway. So we need to create a new API using the API gateway and all. So I will just show you a brief about it. So in the step number 3, we are going to create a REST API. That's why we'll be using the API gateway, and we will be defining HTTP methods on our API, and then we will be triggering a Lambda function. So from the API, we have to enable the course and all. So we will deploy the API, and we will also validate our API. So let's start with the creating a REST API. So let's jump onto the console to the API gateway. So this is our API gateway. So if you click on this, you will get the console page of this. Another thing, like for whatever the services that I'm using, I have created a separate videos for them also individually. If you want to get into more details about it, you can just watch those videos. I will put the link in the description of the video so you can have a look into it. So here I will create my API. So we are going to create a REST API. So I'll just click on the build over here. So you can see over here, we will create a new API, my first API. So here we have to choose over here, edge optimize. So these are the endpoints that these are like best distributed, geographically distributed. So it's a good choice for public services when we are accessing over the internet. So again, I'm using the same region, so nothing to worry about it. Then we will create API. So we need to create a new resource and a method. So we'll just click on this slash, make it sure you click on the slash over here, create method. So method, we'll be having a post method, and it will be a Lambda integration we'll be having. So if you click over here, your Lambda, my first function. So I need to choose my Lambda function. It will automatically pop up. Now that is the rest of the things. We did not to change anything over here. Then hit create method. So once this one is being created, we can just go to the topmost over here. We need to enable the course. So make it sure you choose the option post, because this is the method that we are going to allow. And rest of the things, nothing to change. I think additional settings, nothing. Okay, just click save. So it will overwrite the existing one. So this has been done. Now, the next thing that we have to do over here is to deploy the API. So you can take a new stage and you can mention the stage as STG and deploy. So make it sure we need to keep this URL somewhere. This is the invoke URL that we are going to call in our static pages in order to call this API. So you can save it. So I will just use some, I'll just save it on a notepad so I can later use it. Okay, so that's it. Now it's being created. We will go back to the resources. Now we need to validate whether our API is being integrated properly with the Lambda function or not. So you can scroll it a little bit this side, test. Now here we need to provide some request body. So if your Lambda function is open, you can just go here. I can just copy from here and keep it the same, the JSON format. So I will just go to the API gateway. I'll put it over here, request body. And then I will click the test button. So this API is calling my Lambda function 200. So this is the response. So this is what we got the response. By default, it is creating a logs and all. So only thing important for us is our response body. So this is how we have created and tested our API that calls our Lambda function. Now, the very next thing that we need to do is to move on with the database. Now, front end is separate. Now, Lambda function is being done. We are able to uh, trigger our Lambda function using the API calls. Now, how we can save this data in the database. So we need to give permissions to the Lambda function, but before that, we need to make sure we have a database ready. So we will go to the DynamoDB over here. So the next step we'll be creating, that is step number 4. So we'll be creating a data table. So, and we will enable the Lambda function in order to save the things, but we need to give some permissions to the Lambda function also that I will show you. So let's create a DynamoDB table first. But before that, let me show you the steps that we are going to perform in step number 4. So we are going to create a DynamoDB table, then we are going to create and add the IAM policy to the Lambda function. We will modify our Lambda function in order to write the data into the DynamoDB table. We will test those changes when we invoke our Lambda function, whether the things are getting saved in the database or not. So on DynamoDB also, I have created a separate video. You can utilize the DynamoDB. Even you can install the DynamoDB on-prem on your system without having any connectivity to the cloud. So you can utilize it in your normal PC also. So in detailed video is there. Again, I'll share the whole details in the description so you can have a look into the DynamoDB separately. More about indexes and all those things. So it is very important. So you can see this is my dashboard over here, DynamoDB. So I just went to the tables over here. So so already one table is there. So I'm just going to create a table. So let's say my first table or my first app DB. You can put anything, but make it sure you remember the name because we have to utilize in the Lambda function. Okay, so we'll name it as my first app DB. Now here one partition key is there. So it's like a primary key. So I'm just putting over here ID, make it show. You just have a look into my video, so you will understand what is partition key, what is sort key, what is scan, what is query, and what are the different permissions that we can have. So lots of things are there with the DynamoDB. So here I'm not doing anything else. Default settings. So those SQs and all those things I also have defined in my previous video, also separately on the DynamoDB, so you can have a look on it. So I'll create the table. The most important thing that we have to copy from here, the ARN of this table. So it's creating. It will take some time. I think 1 minute, less than that. So let's move on to this. So we need to copy the, okay, additional info. We will go here. Then we can copy this ARN. It's not required, but just for understanding purpose, I will just show you where we are going to utilize it. Okay, now this database is done. Now the most important thing that we are going to do is our, let's say we will go to the IAM, but in order to go to IAM, we not to go directly. We can just jump into our Lambda function over here. You can just close this extra windows over here. Okay, now you can see over here, when I go to my Lambda function over here, there is a configuration option over here. And if you go to the permissions, you can see this is the role that is by default being created, that is having a basic privileges to execute the Lambda function. So you can have a look into it. So you can see over here, it's loading the policies. So AWS Lambda basic execution. Now here we are going to create some policies over here for the DynamoDB. In order to give Lambda the ability to put something or read something from the DynamoDB or to DynamoDB. So here you can choose the DynamoDB, and then you can, now here you can choose accordingly which permissions you want to give. You can, it's your wish, or you make it all and all, but it's not recommended practice. So I'll just choose one by one if you want, or you can type it also. I will just show you the GUI, so you can just choose over here. List if you want to list the tables. If you want to read, you can give some over here, a query, a scan permission, and you can get item. Then you can, okay, then you can go to the right. You can give some update item, put item. Okay, I think delete also. If you want to give, you can give the delete also. So delete item also. These operations you need to define as a Lambda function in order to execute. So I'm just using some options over here. Now here, that's what the ARN, add the ARN. If you have multiple tables, you can use specific ARN. That's why I copied the into my notepad file over here. So we can specify that ARN. So I'm just giving any into this account, to my account. So you can see it is index any star to this, any table to this account. Okay, so it's not recommended. You can use the ARN. So I'm just skipping that. I'm just giving to all. And then you can click next. And let's say my web app policy. So we can just create the policy. So this policy will get attached to our Lambda function. Now you can see our Lambda function has become more powerful. If you expand this one, you can just have a look into it. What are the permissions are being given? You can see this JSON is there. So this is what I was talking about, the resource you can specify here. You can edit the file and you can provide the resource of your table, the ARN that we have copied. Now, the next very important thing, we have to modify our Lambda function. So I'll just go to my function over here to the code. So here what changes need to be done. So this is our code over here. So I have copied here. So let me go to this one, Lambda. So if you see over here, what is happening basically, it is using the Boto3. This is very, I have created one example for this, how we can move the files uh, from the S3 bucket, read the files and move into the DynamoDB and all using the Lambda function. So same concept is being used over here. We're using Boto3 and resource is the DynamoDB and your table name. So this is very important, our table name. Let me check what is our table name. So our table name is my first app DB. So I need to provide over here my first app DB. Okay, so this is just creating an event handler in which it is recording the time, and this is what it is creating ID and the name, first name and last name. So I will just copy this one and I will just go to my function over here, Lambda function, and I'll just Control A, Control V. So I have changed my Lambda function. Just we can change it hello from just the name. So we need not to do anything. We just need to file, save, and deploy. That's it. Deploy. Now we need to test this Lambda function. So we will click on this test over here, Lambda function. So those two values were being provided in the test event. So you can see it is 200. Now, if you go to your DynamoDB table, so I executed the Lambda function. So this is my table over here. So I will just refresh, or you can just click on this explore items. So you can see over here, my name is being added over here. So whenever this Lambda function will be executed, like it will create, will give you the output as well as it will save the data in the DB also. Now our connectivity between the API to Lambda, Lambda to DynamoDB is done, but our front end is remaining. So we will make some changes to our front end in order to interact with the API gateway. That API gateway will interact with the Lambda, then Lambda will interact with the DynamoDB. So for that, we need to make some changes to the front end. So you can see over here, I've made some changes to the CSS by default. This is even I have taken this content you can copy from the Amazon website, but there are a few things that will not work. So you can copy my files, and moreover, some interface is a little bit different. So the latest interface doesn't even matches with the existing that content provided by the AWS. So we will have something. Okay, so here we need to make some changes to the first name, last name, and you can see this front end will be calling our API. So as if you remembered in the step number 3, in which we were creating a API gateway, we copied our API URL. So this is what we are going to change over here. So save it. And then I think nothing to be changed over here. So it can be kept as it is. So, but to make it sure, you need to zip the file. So I'll just go to the folder over here. So I will just go to the project, final, and then let me delete this one or just rename it. I don't want to lose the existing one because in that one I have made some few other changes. Let me change over here. Okay, this one. Okay, So, I will just click on this and compress the zip file. So this is our new file index.zip. Now this one I need to deploy to my first app. Now if you go to the my first app over here, if you go to the my first app, now you can see deploy the, I think some token issues are there. I need to let me refresh it. Okay, so I will deploy the updates over here. So we have to choose the file and we can upload the latest zip file and save and deploy. Okay, now we will visit. So this is how it will be looking like. So test done. So when I click submit, so you can see it is giving me the response. So let's check in our database over here, items. So I will just refresh this one. So you can see over here, it is working test done. So this is how we can have a static front end that we can host with the Amplify or with the S3. And then we can have a API calls that being made to the Lambda function performing those operations that you want to perform with the DynamoDB. I think long time back, somebody requested me to create something like this project and all. And I told them to just go ahead with the S3 bucket and all instead of Amplify. They can utilize that. So the same file, if you see over here, let me do one thing over here. I will upload the same file. So I have created a one S3 new.html. It is a copy of the same index.html. Just the name is different. So I will go to my S3 bucket in which I am already hosting my website. So I will just, this is just cloudtech.com in which I'm hosting my website. So I will just use the s3 new.html. So I will upload this files. Let me click upload. And then let's go to the window over here. So I will just call my just cloud tech. Okay. So slash s3 new.html. So you can see, so I'm just writing from S3, so we can differentiate between both. So you can see we got it over here from S3. So this is a static page calling the API gateway, calling that we are calling that Lambda function. Integration is there, then it is getting saved into the DynamoDB. So let's check over here. So you can see we have get it from S3. So this is how either you can utilize the Amplify or you can utilize the S3. Amplify is more powerful with like for different languages and all. But if you are just having a front end that is a static one, and you want to have the this API calling that backend, saving the data and all, like you can have like more distributed approach. So you can utilize this way. So this was just a sample. Make it sure you delete all the resources. So I will just highlight that you can delete your Lambda function, but if it is not being called, there is no harm in that, but better to delete all the resources that were being created to avoid any billing and all. So you can just delete. and then you can just go to the API gateway. You can just go to the APIs over here and you can select one by one and you can delete. So just put confirm. Okay, so you can also go to the AMPLIFY and you can go to my first app over here and you can go to all apps over here. Oops, we need to click delete inside somewhere here. I think app settings, general settings, then delete app. So delete the app. So what else is left? I think our database, so tables, you can just select all of them and click delete. So confirm. So delete all the CloudWatch and no need of creating a backup and all. We don't want it. So that's all. So I hope you were able to understand like how we can create a web app with separating the front end, the back end, calling with the API, how to use the serverless Lambda and all. Please give it a try with the Amplify as well as with the S3. But if you're having a static website, you can utilize that to S3. So both the scenarios are applicable. So please do like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.